Hey everyone, Mr. Sud coming at you with a review of the Unit 6 progress check for AP Comp Sci A. We're doing one of the progress checks regarding the FRQs for 1D arrays. So there's two questions here that we need to answer. The first one is we basically have an array of string objects. These are called words. That's the name of the array. And essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a way of identifying the words that have ing at the end. Okay. And anywhere that happens, we want to basically extract and filter those words like we used to do in comp sci principles. The only challenge here is that these are 1D arrays, not array lists, so it's not as easy. You can't just modify um, the existing array. One thing to pay attention to that I messed up on is the letters ing obviously have to be at the end. So you'll notice that they purposely put hinge there because it has ing in the middle. We do not want that word. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to write this code segment. And very specifically, they tell you that you must, right here in this line, that's pretty darn important, right? We need that code segment to basically have an enhanced for loop. Okay, so let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is when we use an enhanced for loop, we're going to go ahead and do, so it's in the format of for, right? Some sort of data type, and then whatever the, in this case, an array is, should be imposed from the OG array. It's basically the way it's going to work. So in other words, for each element of the OG array, we're going to bring it over to the array. So it's going to access each one and then do something with it. This allows us to essentially modify the original array by making a clone. Okay, that's going to access each element one after the other. So in this case, the original array name is just words, right? It's right here. So those are the array of words. The new array, let's just call it, in class, we called it ing detector. And for the type, this is obviously going to be a string. Okay, so we're basically creating ing detector while we're like inside of a for loop, which is kind of cool about enhanced for loops. Okay, so I have that set up and I'm thinking that I need a way to find out if a word has the letters ing at the end, we need to grab it. So let's start with the word if, right? So again, if that word has the letters ing, but it has to be at the end, then we can go ahead and extract that word. So at first I was thinking maybe I should use an index sub, which would return a value of where ing would exist. But there's no guarantee that it's going to be the very last three letters, right? It could find it like in hinge, it would return a value greater than -1 because it's in the middle, but there is an E after the ing. So that's kind of problematic. So what we need to do here is we need to use the substring method, okay? And we're going to use basically our new array here, ing detector. We got to use that thing to call the substring, right? With a dot operator, obviously. And then you might ask, well, what do we want when we call use the substring method? Well, we're going to go ahead and because the for each element of words, it's going to be copied over to ing detector. We're going to go ahead and use ing detector to call the length, right? And we want to make sure that we grab the substring. So whatever the length of the word is, we're going to go ahead and subtract 3 at the end of it. Now, just to check out what we're doing. So substring, remember, if you give it just a singular number, is going to go find wherever that index value is, right? Say in this case for trailing, it'd be the L, right? Or I'm sorry, G would be the at the end. And wherever substring is, let's say that a substring is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I did a substring of this word at 4, it's going to go ahead and grab everything after 4, okay? So what this is doing is it's taking ing detector.length. So the length of this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we're going to subtract 3. Okay, so 8 minus 3 is 5. Sorry, if I did 4, it would include that letter. But at 5, do you see how it's going to go ahead and extract ing? Same thing with batting, same thing with fading. Okay, so this is going to go ahead and extract that word ing, basically last 3 letters. And then what we're going to do is we want to compare that to see is that equals, right, the letters ing. So basically, does the last 3 letters match? Match ing, right? That's what I'm trying to check for. Let me try and fit this on one line. Okay, so we're going to do that. So if this is true, then we're going to go ahead and print out that word, which is just the ing detector, right? Because we're doing each word at a time. And then close the curly brace. And that's it. You're just writing the code segment. You need to write a method. So that's done there. All right, let's move on to question number 2. This one's a little bit more complicated, but not too bad if you ask me. Basically, we have employees that are selling stuff. The first thing we got to do is compute this bonus threshold method. We actually have to do it. You can read the instructions yourself, but just in a nutshell, this is the formula we need to follow to find out, like, if you'll see in part B, if we sell more than 51.75 or 52 items, then that employee gets a bonus. Okay. First thing I got to do, though, is basically just execute this formula for compute bonus threshold. So we're going to take, so when I read this example, which is really helpful, they're going to take the sum of all of the items sold from all 10 employees. And you'll notice that they're going to back out or subtract the smallest number and the biggest number. And furthermore, we got to take whatever that number is and divide it by 8. Now, when I count the number of people there's 10. So what they did is they added everything up, backed out the min and max, and then took away those 2 counts from the total. All right, so in order to do this, there's a couple things happening. I know I need to find a minimum, right? So in this case, like, this would be, I'll just write above it, right? We have all the employees right there. And then this is the min and this is the max. So I know I need to back those out for sure. And then we also need to store it somewhere. So I kind of tried to break this down for me in a couple different ways. One is I said, well, first thing I got to do is find the total of everybody, right? And then separately, I need to find the min. Separately, I need to find the max. So I made a couple different variables. Let's put this in red so it's a little bit clear. I did min as you could do 0 here, right? You could set it to be 0. You can also set it to be the first value. I originally used 0, and then I saw when I checked out my the answers, the canonical solution, they used the first element. So I was like, oh, that's fine. Either way will work. And then I did int max, and let's go ahead and do items sold. So basically, we're presetting the values for min and max, right? Because eventually we need to find the min or max, so why not start with the first value? You could do 0 as well. And then I decided I was going to calculate the total because I wanted to tackle these set of numbers, right, and adding them up. And then I also wanted to find out what I called the net of netting out min and max. So I did those 2 variables as well. We're going to need a for loop because we need to go through this array, right? Oops, so there we go. So 4, and I just did the usual, and I'm writing this because my handwriting is not the best. And we want to make sure that we're running less than, items sold dot length. And then we're going to go ahead and do index plus plus. And then I ended up doing the total plus equals, right? So it's a running total for total, where I'm going to go traverse through each item in the item sold and just keep adding it up. So I took care of that first, right? And then I busted out the if statement to now evaluate where the minimum is. So minimum is either 0 or the first item sold. So I did, hey, if that minimum value is greater than items sold at that particular index value within the for loop, then we're going to go ahead and set our minimum equal to whatever that value is. And that's it for that. You can go ahead and close out that if statement. Now, the other thing you got to be careful is you got a couple options. You can go with else if or else. You need to really understand what are the conditionals. Else if says if the if statement is not true right above it, then the else if can execute. So you might chain a bunch of them, right? You might remember from comp sci principles. Else would happen if it's like if that first criteria is not true, so if it's false, then whatever else happens, this else is going to get executed. In this case, I'm just trying to evaluate min and max, right? I don't need it to like do one or the other. So I'm gonna go ahead and evaluate whether or not my max value is less than the index value. If it is, let's go ahead and update that max value, which is going to be set to whatever that item sold is at that index value. And then I can close out that if, right? So the code is going to go ahead and look at both of these if statements to see if they can execute any of them. And then I think we're done with the for loop there because now we actually have to do the equation. So I went ahead and we have the total calculated. So my net is going to be equal to the total minus the minimum and the maximum I just found. And then remember, this is not a void return type, it's a double. So we're going to go ahead and return the net value that just calculated in the line above divided by, right? So remember, I have to do the items sold dot length, and I have to back out 2. Now here's where I went wrong. When you go ahead and return this, there's a problem. The net is going to be calculated as an integer, okay? But items sold dot length minus 2 will also be an integer. In order for this to work, though, with the money we're going to use later, this has to be a double. So this is the one thing I certainly missed, and I did a double take when I looked at what College Board had. So we need to make sure that and it's in the scoring rubric too, you'll see in the other file. But we have to, I thought maybe the whole thing could be double, but it has to be item sold dot length minus 2. If you might say, well, Souther, why don't you just cast it to the entire thing? That's what I originally thought. But then you're going to go ahead and essentially have an integer divided by another integer, which is not helpful. So we need this value because this could potentially be a decimal. We need that to be the double. And then when you divide an integer by a double, it'll go ahead and become a double. So that's that. The last part of this, you can read it, is we have a more complicated equation. Fixed wage becomes 10 and the per item wage is 1.5. Both these are went ahead and declared. So when they say suppose that means you're going to use those two. So I'm going to write the code here just because I'm not having to write. I'm going to type, so it's a little bit easier. In order to do this, what you're going to do is I went ahead and we need to create essentially a way to find the bonus threshold, right? At the moment, we don't know what that is. So remember, in part A, we made the method called compute bonus threshold. So I need to have a variable here that is the double return type that's going to go ahead and house whatever output comes out from the bonus threshold method. So that's how we're going to do it. Because I'm not trying to call it, I'm just trying to assign it right now to the variable. And then we can go ahead and use the for loop like we always do, because we need to traverse through the arrays, right? And then it's going to be dependent on item sold dot length, and then index plus plus. Actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this down because on the next page, I think that's where I put the actual start of the code. Yep, there it is. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and run that for loop. And the first thing I got to figure out is so it says right up above, like, hey, if these values, like 4850, 3762, if those are greater than the bonus threshold, which we calculated earlier based on that array to be 51.75, then go ahead and give them a bonus. Okay. So right now what I did was we did the for loop. Okay. So I'm going to access each element. And then I need to evaluate whether or not, first things first, is that item sold, right, bracket I, is that going to be greater than the bonus threshold, right, in that variable? If it is, we have a very specific way to calculate this, which is we're going to take that new array they want us to use for wages. That's already they already told us that's been declared. It's the same length. So we're going to use that. And we're going to go ahead and use the value of fixed wage, which is right here, right? We know that value to be 10, by the way. We're going to go ahead and add it to this per item wage times 1.5, because that's what it tells me to do. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, not times 1.5. The per item wage value is 1.5. Where am I getting that? It says it right up above here. So it says per item wage is 1.5. So if I take the number of items sold times the per item wage, then we're good. So it should be items sold, and we're within the for loop, and we're going to access that individual index value. Change that to index where it should be. And then once I find that, then we can multiply by 1.1. Okay. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller just so it kind of fits on one line. right? So in other words, if this is triggered, then the person gets the bonus threshold. Now, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and whip out the else because the only other possibility is, so if that first point you didn't meet the bonus threshold, then the else should execute. So in other words, else becomes the catch-all. So I'm going to go ahead and do wages bracket index, and we're going to go ahead and fill in the fixed wage, which is $10, plus the per item wage, right, times the item sold at that index value, right? And then I'm not going to include the bonus of 1.1. So then we're done there. And then because it's a void return type, we're just going to leave it as that. And then we're done. So hope this helps. And I'll see you guys in class.